I'm Norse Packer. I'm really happy to have you here. Welcome. We're going to have a lot of fun today. You're here for the free pottery masterclass. It's going to be great. I'm really glad you're here. Hopefully you can see me down here now. I'm excited to have you here. You're in the free pottery masterclass. We're going to talk about 3 tricks on how to throw better pottery this week. I'm going to pack as much in to this brief time we have together. I'm going to put in as much as I can. So I'm glad you're here. Let's jump in, and thanks for joining me. Before we get started, I know your time is valuable, so here's what you can expect from me. We're going to talk about the 3 biggest mistakes that every potter makes when they first get started with centering. And then we're going to talk about a powerful secret to keep the clay from collapsing. And then we're going to talk about 3 tricks to keep cracks from forming in the bottoms of your pots. And so it's really important for me that you learn these things, because these will give you immediate results this week. In case you're wondering whether this masterclass is for you, I want you to know that you're in the right place if you're a beginning potter or even an advanced potter and you want to improve on your techniques or learn techniques, and if you have access to a pottery wheel, and if you have about 45 minutes to spend with us today. So you might also be wondering why I'm doing this free class. First, I really love sharing and teaching all about the pottery, about my processes and everything that I do. And these principles are really critical for creating great pottery. And so I like sharing those. And second, I do have a full-length pottery course that you can purchase at the end. If you like what you see today and you want to learn more, we can talk about that at the end. So as a way of saying thank you for sticking around for the masterclass, at the end you'll be able to download a 14-page PDF that has all of the photos and all of the notes from the class, so you'll be able to review them as often as you'd like. And you'll also have a special offer that I'll make available only to the people who attend the masterclass. So if you are meeting me for the very first time, I'm Norse Packer of Packer Pottery. Welcome to the masterclass and to my studio. I'm a professional potter, I'm an online teacher, and I like to show other people how to make pottery pieces that they can be really happy with and sell for a premium price. I've had over 30 years experience. I've created more than 20,000 pieces of pottery. I've made thousands of dollars selling pottery, and I've taught pottery students for over 17 years. But it didn't start out that way. Check out that great collar. I first took pottery classes in high school and fell in love with the process. I loved how it felt in your hands, the tactile feeling of the clay, and I really enjoyed feeling like I could create something from nothing. And I'm sure you love pottery just as much as I do. I continued making pottery when I was in college, and then I told my wife that I think I wanted to pursue pottery continually as a hobby, even though I had no idea how we were going to accomplish this lofty goal. It seemed completely impossible. But I shared it with her, and that was the key. Later, she was out with a friend. They were in some kind of an auction and saw a potter's wheel. So she brought home a pottery wheel for me for $100. It was super heavy, and it was just a kick wheel, but it was great. I was so excited to have it. And so I found a way to get some clay and put it on the wheel. We didn't even have room for it. I didn't have a studio. I had it out on my porch and put the clay out there and started throwing some pots. It was great. I didn't have a kiln or any glazes or any of the other tools except for my tools from college. And so, but it was still fun, and I still made some pieces. I was so excited. And then I didn't have any way to glaze or fire them. So I found a community college that would fire my pottery for me. And so that's how I got going on that. It was great. I was really excited to have that wheel. I dreamt of making high quality pottery, things that would become my favorite things, like my favorite mug, my favorite plate and my favorite bowl. But my first pottery wasn't my favorite quality of first. I certainly had pottery struggles, cracked pottery, glaze that didn't come out. Everything was way too heavy. And if I tried to get it too thin, it would always collapse. And there were times when I was really discouraged and wanted to quit, but I dreamed of making these favorite things, and so I kept going. I kept learning and developing my own process and style for making quality pottery. It was a lot of hard work, but after all that work and continuing to learn, I ended up coming up with some beautiful pieces very consistently, and that I was really proud. And because of the process I was able to develop, I could create and make my own unique work, pieces that I treasured and displayed in my home. And then something unexpected happened. Friends and family started to take notice of my pottery and started asking if they could buy things from me. And so soon I started selling at trade shows, farmers market, and community events. And that led to my pottery getting featured on a popular food blog, which got my name out there. And now I've launched several Kickstarters, I've opened up my online store, and we've enjoyed the extra income. It's been great, and I've been having a lot of fun with the pottery. As I started sharing my work with other people, I started hearing some comments that just made me thrilled. Comments like, Norris, my daughter and I get together every morning and have coffee with your mugs, and they are our favorite mugs, and we share that time together every day. Or, I use this bowl for my cereal every morning. Or a comment like, thank you for the vase, I use it every time I get fresh flowers. That has brought me a lot of joy. I really love that. But the thing that has really brought me the most joy is helping other potters find that same joy. My philosophy has been that, YouTube videos aren't the best way to learn pottery. You get a smattering of different techniques and styles. You need more of a comprehensive step-by-step plan. And that's what I would like early on and what I think every new potter deserves. And that's what I'm committed to create for my students. And that's why you're here in this master class today too. So for some additional free education, come hang out with me. It's a party over on my Instagram account. And after this class, I'd love if you would send me some pictures of some before and some after pieces. That would be awesome. I would love to see how this class has helped you, and I'd love to see what work you've done. And so drop me an email, show me some pictures. That'd be great. You can send it to my email. You can see me on my Instagram page, and you can also see me on packerpottery.com as well. So I want to begin by talking about the 3 mistakes and how to fix them. If you can overcome these, it will really take your pottery to the next level. So the first mistake that potters make is wobbly arms when you're centering. I had an intern who just couldn't center because of wobbly arms. She would sit back and put her hands out on the clay and squeeze for all she was worth, and she just didn't have enough strength in her hands or her wrists to center the clay, so it was always going everywhere. And really, your hands and wrists just aren't strong enough to center the clay, and so that's why you have to do the other technique. You need to create strength and steadiness by bracing your arms on your legs. It creates an anchor point and keeps them steady, and you also get the strength of your arms and your shoulders and your back as you're leaning into it. So this intern that had wobbly hands and wobbly arms, she would start to lean into it, and I would tell her, just really lean into it. But she was just kind of a smaller girl, and she said, Norris, I just don't have that much to lean in. And we laughed about that, but she got the point, and she would lean in, get on top of the clay, and use her back and leverage, and pretty soon she was centering like a pro, and it really wasn't an issue after that. She really got it. So here's a before and after. The first photo is obviously showing it off center, and once it's off center, it's going to cause all kinds of problems later on in the pulling and the trimming and everything. So it's important to brace your elbows. Centering is the foundation of everything. If you can center well, everything else falls into place, and all the other steps really become a lot of fun and very easy to do once you've got it centered. Now I want to take you right into the studio and I'll give you a demonstration of what I'm talking about. Hi, we're going to talk about centering and some of the challenges that we experience and how to overcome some of the problems. And one of the basic things that every potter needs to do is figure out how to hold their arms when they're centering. So one of the techniques that you need to use is you have to make sure that you're holding your arms steady and that you leverage them. I call them wobbly hands. So if you try to squeeze, you hold your hands out like this, and look how my hands are just wobbling around. That's not centering. I can squeeze as hard as I want, and I'm still never going to be able to center like this, right? And so you want to get to the point where you are moving the clay, not letting the clay move your hands. That's the main thing. And the way that you do that is to brace your arm, and you're using the palm of your hand, and it's probably about at the 8 o'clock angle, and you're putting your right hand up here, you're pushing with your left and pulling with your right, and holding your arms stiff and tense. So you're tensing up your muscles, and then just pushing it right into the clay. And that way they're not wobbling with the clay as it's going around a little bit, but pretty soon they'll see that it just stops. So as you press hard, there you go. And you can see how that takes the wobble out of it. I'm not letting my hands wobble with the clay. I'm holding my hands steady and bracing them and moving the clay instead. So that's the first key, is to not have wobbly hands and keep your arms braced and leverage into it like this. So you've got it out of round like this. So you brace your arms and put your hands on it and then lean into it. And that makes it really easy to really knock out the centering like that. Welcome back from the first video. I hope that was helpful to you. Now we're going to talk about mistake number 2. And this is a mistake that often happens to potters. It certainly has happened to me many times. And you've centered the clay and you started to pull it up and it seems like it's wobbling or uneven and you're wondering how that could possibly be. Well, what really happens is you get the top and the center pretty well centered, but the very bottom doesn't get centered. And so that creates problems. If the bottom's not centered and it's not centered all the way through, it creates problems with opening and pulling and trimming. So the solution is to make sure to push your fingers all the way to the base as you're centering, all the way down to the wheel head or the bat or whatever you're using. Make sure you've got lubrication. You don't want to mess up your hands, but you do want to put your hands all the way down to the bottom and squeeze in really hard to get that very bottom very centered. And then you'll be able to tell the whole thing will be centered, including the bottom, and it will be great. So again, here's a before and after. And you can see one is obviously not centered at the bottom and the other one is perfectly centered. Now let's jump back into the studio and I'll give you a demonstration on this technique. Another thing that you have to be careful of as you're starting to center is that you want to make sure that you get the bottom inside centered. So the goal is to center all of the particles in the clay from the center all the way to the outside, and not just center just the outside of the clay. And also not center the top half, but leave the bottom half wobbly. Let me show you what I mean. So right here, the clay is all out of center. And if I just center this top piece, I can do that. I can center the top piece and the bottom is still wobbly. So in a sense, I could still get this pot thrown a little bit, but the bottom is so wobbly, it's going to make the whole piece wobbly. So what you have to do is come all the way down to the bat or the wheel head and put your fingers all the way on it really tight like this, and then squeeze all the way down to the bottom. And that way you're getting the very bottom inside centered. And if you've got a lot of clay and you cone it up, then you can go back and work on this bottom again too. So there's not quite so much clay, but go all the way down to the wheel, all the way down to the bat with your fingers and squeeze the very, very bottom. And that way that's centered. And now when I pull it back down from the top, the whole thing will be centered. And it won't be just the top that's centered, it'll be also the bottom. So when I throw it, the reason that you want to do that is because now, with the whole thing centered like it is, now I can open up the base all the way to the bottom, open it all the way up, open to the wall that I want to start pulling out. And it's still perfectly centered, because you want to keep it centered all the way through the centering and the pulling process. You want the clay to remain centered. So that's a key thing to remember, all the way down to the bottom of the back, center the bottom of the clay. Welcome back. I hope that was a great video for you and that you picked up some things that you can really use. Now we're going to talk about mistake number 3, opening the clay out of center. So I had a student one time who had seen a YouTube video about opening the clay using 2 thumbs going down, and she just couldn't get it to work very well. Well, my technique works every time. So you need to be able to open the clay perfectly in the center every time. Otherwise it makes it impossible to pull and makes it uneven. As you can see, one side's thick and one side's thin. So the solution is to brace your arms, touch your hands together to keep them steady, place a fingertip in the center of the clay. So putting one finger down and trying to open like that isn't going to work, right? So I use 2 fingers, and you'll see the centripetal force pulls your finger right into the middle. Keep your hand steady as you push all the way down. I need to take a break. Look, my favorite mug. Okay, so here's the before and after. Of course, you can see one side's thick and one thin, and wouldn't be able to pull it up, and the other one is perfectly in the center, and that'll be great. Now let's head into the studio, and I'll show you that technique. One of the mistakes that I see beginners make often is not opening the hole in the center of the pot in the very center. I see them opening it a little too fast or making it off center. So here's what that looks like. I'm going to go a little too fast, and I'm going to try to make it so that it's a little off center. So I put my finger in the middle, and if I go down, you can see that it's wobbly. That's what it looks like. It's pretty wobbly, but you can see that that's caused by opening it too fast and not getting it right in the center. And now if I try to pull it up, it will make one side thicker and thinner. And so it'll pull up very unevenly, and there really is no way to save it. So at the very beginning, you have to brace your hands and slowly put your finger right in the center, and then you'll be able to find the center and open it without it being off center at all. Now I'm going to show you how to open the clay for the first time. So we've got it nice and centered from top to bottom. And now the key is to finding the center spot. So you can just take your finger and just set it on the clay, and as you start to push down, it automatically pulls into the center so you can really tell. And some potters like to open with both thumbs. They'll put both thumbs on it like this. But I like to use my middle finger, and I like to brace my right hand with my left hand so I can hold my arm steady, put my finger on it, and find that center spot. And then I can push down, and as soon as it starts to get sticky, just drop a little bit of water in it so that it keeps lubricated. And then you can slide it right on down and open it up nice and steady. And then you go all the way down, and you'll stop just before you get to the bottom so that you have enough for the base for opening. Okay, now I want to talk to you about the powerful secret to preventing collapse. Students and beginning potters and all potters have to deal with keeping the clay from collapsing. And sometimes beginning students don't know why it's collapsing. They don't understand that process. And a lot of times the difference in clay makes a difference. Some clays are more suited to pulling than others. They have a stronger clay body, and so you can pull. And some clays are very susceptible to water and other things and will collapse more easily. But generally speaking, most clays absorb a lot of water during the sintering process, and students will often take too long to sinter, and so it absorbs too much water, the clay gets soft, and then it starts to collapse. Or you're using too much water while you're pulling, and that happens too. And the real solution to all of this is managing the water. So you manage it by sintering and pulling quickly. So if you can sinter and cone up and cone down 3 times, and that's all, and then it's sintered, that's perfect. And that's a goal to shoot for. A lot of times when you're starting out, it takes a little bit longer, but the longer you take, the more water that gets into the clay and the softer the clay gets. So you need to shoot for trying to do it as minimal as you can, but getting it completely sintered as well. And then the other problem is pulling up the walls. So if you can pull up the walls in 3 pulls and get it as tall as you want it to be in 3 pulls, that would be ideal. That'll minimize the water that gets pushed into the clay. And so here's a bonus secret that I wanted to share with you. This is so great. As I was learning in college and learning how to do pulling, one of the problems was your hand sticks on the inside, so it has to keep lubricated so your hands can keep moving up, right? And so often I would do this. I'd put my hand on the inside and I'd squeeze a sponge and run water down the inside of the pot. Then it was nice and lubricated and I could pull it up. But I didn't need to do that. I didn't need to put all that water into the clay. It absorbed too much water and then it would collapse. So the solution is to keep it as dry as possible and use as little water as you can. So for example, I dip my hand in the bucket of water, I take it out and I shake off the excess and then use that to pull it up. I don't ever drip water in the clay anymore. And that's enough lubrication to keep it going. And sometimes you need a little bit more and that's okay. And sometimes as I'm pulling, I'll even use a little bit of my fingertips because it doesn't require my whole hand on the side of the pot on the inside. So between minimizing the water and the angling of your fingers, you'll be able to do it and minimize the water that you use on the inside of the pot, and that's a great way to go. So here's a before and after. Obviously collapsed this pot, pulled it too thin, and the second one on the right, use just the right amount of water, use your rib, and it's not collapsing. Now let's go to the studio and I can show you these techniques at the wheel. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about overcoming some of the challenges with throwing tall and thin and keeping your pots from collapsing. I'm going to share with you some secrets that have really helped me overcome those challenges. The first one is to sinter quickly. So it's kind of a water management issue. You want to be careful to not have too much water introduced into your clay so that as you get it taller, it doesn't collapse. It doesn't have so much water in it. One of the mechanics behind the clay is how soft is the clay, how well do the particles mesh together, and that gives it strength, right? How fine the particles are and how much water's in there. And so in the sintering process, you're introducing quite a bit of water into the clay, coning up and coning down. And so the more quickly you can accomplish that, the less water you've introduced into the clay at that process, right? I wish I had time to go into all of that, but I don't have that time for this video. But I do want to show you the next secret, which is really to pull up in 3 pulls. So I've centered it in 3, centering, coning up and coning down 3 times. And now I'm going to open it and pull it in 3 pulls. So my first pull, so I've opened it, I've got the sides pretty even, and now I'm just going to do the first pull. I'm going to do it fairly aggressively, but not so much that I put too much pressure on the clay and too much stress on it. This clay is pretty soft, and when the clay is a little bit stiffer, it's harder to center, but it's easier to throw thin. So when the clay is really soft like this, there's some tricks to managing it. This is also a very fine clay, which doesn't lend itself to go really small and really tall. So I'll kind of tell you. So that was the first pull, and already I've taken quite a bit of the clay out. Now here's the second one. Go all the way down to the bottom and push it into the bottom, and then get ready for this second pull. The second pull up, nice and steady, all the way from the bottom, all the way to the top. And you'll notice my top got a little bit wider. I'm going to choke that in just a smidge and hit the top with my sponge to keep it nice and level. All right, so that was the second pull. And now for the third pull, I'm going to slow the wheel down just a little bit. Now that it's getting a little bit thinner, I'm going to slow the wheel down just a little bit and do a third pull. And I'm going to try to get it as thin as I can with this pull and still keep it intact. Right? So one of the keys is not to just pour a ton of water down on the sides. Like normally, I'll rest my hand on it, pour water on my fingertips so that it runs right down the side of the pot, so it makes the inside nice and slippery for your pull. Well, there's a better way to do it, and that is to just wet your hand a little bit and just use that lubrication for the inside, or to take your sponge, not dripping wet, and just take your sponge and wipe it on the inside. You don't have to have it soaking in water, right, to be able to pull. Just enough to keep your fingers from sticking, that's all you want, right? So are you ready for my third pull? All right, here it comes. All the way down to the bottom, nice and even. I spend a little time just making sure that that bottom is just right. And now I'm ready for that pull. Slow and steady, all the way up. All right, so that was the third pull. It's not quite as thin as I want, and I think I can go more, but I have to be careful now because there's quite a bit of water that's been introduced into this clay, so I have to be careful. So I'm going to take my corner rib right now, and I'm going to use this flat side of the corner rib to kind of just support and compress the particles in the clay. So as I push it on the very bottom, use the side of my finger on the inside. Now I'm going to bring it up and just carefully bring it up and push the inside clay into the outside rib, all the way from the bottom to the top. And you can see in the color change that it took off all this loose, slippy clay that was on the outside, dried it out a little bit. Now you can also take your sponge, make sure to dry out the inside of the bottom, right? Because you don't want water to accumulate down there. And now I think I can actually do one more pull if I'm really careful. So I've just got my fingers wet. I'm not dripping clay on the sides of the pot. Just got my fingers wet just enough so that my fingers don't stick to the inside. And now I can do one more pull. Starting to get a little wobbly right there in the middle. And as you get up toward the top, you're putting pressure on the top half. It starts to wobble a little bit in there. It started to wobble, and that's all right, not much. And so it's getting so thin that as you start to put pressure up on the top, it starts to twist at the bottom a little bit. Okay, it's pretty thin all the way down. I'm going to use my softer rib now to go over this one more time. This time I'm going to shape it just a little bit. So I'm going to start by pushing it out, and I'm using this rib to support it on the outside so that it stays nice and dry. Just enough water on it to keep it sliding, but not enough to really introduce a lot of water and make it collapse. So that's the key, is to pull it up as quick as you can, 3 poles if you can, a 4th one if you're needing to. But the faster you can pull it up and the more even you can pull it up, the less water you'll introduce to your clay. The thinner that you'll be able to make it, and the taller you'll be able to make it. And that's kind of the key. Those are the key secrets to getting it tall and thin without having it collapse. Welcome back. I hope that was great. You can see all of the special ways of minimizing the water impact on your clay. Now we're going to talk about the 3 tricks that you absolutely must know to avoid cracking on the base. This is something that happens to all potters, beginning and advanced. You have to deal with cracking, but you can learn how to minimize it. So here are the 3 things that I want to share with you. I know it's super disappointing when you've thrown something big, you worked really hard on it, and then there's so many places that you have to get through, the sanding and the trimming and all that, and you finally get it, and then all of a sudden at the very end, there's a crack, and that can be really disappointing, and I know that very well. Part of the problem is clay is made up of particles, and this is a little bit of a simplistic example, but you can kind of see what I'm talking about. So clay is made up of particles, and as you introduce water and as you stretch the clay, those particles start to separate a little bit, and it creates less strength within the clay structure itself. And so by compressing the clay, what you can do is use a rib in the bottom of your pot, and it will compress it and make it much stronger. So compressing really is an important part of it. You can use your fingers to go across back and forth and compress that bottom, and you can use a rib to do it as well. So compression is really great. So let's watch a video of me in the studio showing you how to use compression. Okay, so now we're going to talk about compression a little bit, and I've thrown just a small casserole dish, and I've opened it and put a lot of stress on it as I've been opening the clay up, right? And so I've run my fingers back and forth across the bottom like this to get the clay compressed. In addition to that, I can use a corner rib like this to get compression. And so I just start in here like this and move it across. And then you can move it back like that. You can even use the wider edge to get more compression across the bottom like this. And you want to use compression like this when you're doing anything. I mean, even a mug, you want to compress the bottom of it with your rib if you can, or at least with your fingers. The bowls, I usually use this rib here to compress the base of the bowls as I'm making it, so I can press it. Some clays are more susceptible than cracking than others. This clay is particularly susceptible, and I think most clays are pretty susceptible to that. One of the things that happens is as you pull that clay out, you actually stretch the clay, and you're creating some tension in it, and you're spreading the clay particles out a little bit further and further. And so compressing it kind of packs them in tighter, and it makes the clay more stable. And if you trim it evenly, so the thickness is fairly even, and if you let it dry slowly and carefully, then you shouldn't have any problem with cracking. And I know cracking can be a big deal and happens to all potters regardless of their skill levels, but compression usually resolves all of those kinds of issues. And that's it. Okay, welcome back. Now I want to tell you a story about when I was making a big platter. So I threw a very large platter, and it was great. It was big, and it had a beautiful rim on it that was just the way I wanted it. And I carved, I did elaborate carving on it. I was so excited to have this big platter. And I trimmed it. It was a little heavy, so I trimmed it some more. I used the rib to compress against it. I thought it was great. And then when it dried and fired, sure enough, a big crack right in the middle of it. So that rib compression wasn't quite enough. So I want to talk to you about the technique to helping that. Instead of stretching the clay, another technique specifically that is used for plates and platters that are really great. Before I do that, let me grab another drink. So as you are centering the clay, instead of stopping the centering when you get to this typical mound of clay, you actually keep compressing it down. Spread it down, it'll spread out. Use your arms to press it down and use a lot of weight on it to keep compressing it, spreading it out flatter and flatter. And that is really the secret. So now let's see what that looks like in the studio. Okay, as you can see, I've got the clay centered. Now I'm going to be talking to you about one of the tips and the secret to keeping S-cracks off the bottom of your plates and platters. So we've talked about compression and the importance of that, but I'm going to talk about it specifically as it refers to plates. So I've got the clay centered, and normally I would be just about ready to open it and pull up the walls of something. But for a plate or a platter, I need to take another step. First, I'm going to hit it again a little bit and just get it really centered. There we go. And then normally I would stop at about right here and be able to open it. But for a plate, I'm going to bring it down even farther. I'm just going to keep pushing hard on it from the top. One of the things that you have to be mindful of as you're bringing this down like this is you have to be mindful of this outer edge, because if the clay just rolls over it, it will trap water or slip underneath, and you don't want that for your plate. So again, I'm just using the flat of my hand, basically the centering. I'm using my leverage to just push it down. So I'm just continuing to push this down. And I hit this outside edge again. Now I'm getting close to the thickness that I want for the inside of the plate. So I'm just using my hands and my fist to just kind of leverage that down. And now I'm ready to kind of open it up a little bit more. It's going a little fast. Okay, so now I can push down and use my fist to kind of pull it out. But for the most part, I'm just pushing down and compressing it. I'm also evening out the bottom. One thing that has a tendency to happen is it tends to be a little bit higher here and a little bit shallower right here. And so you have to consciously put a little more effort into a little bit deeper on the inside and then let up the pressure as you move out a little bit. So now I'm getting this out close to where I want to be finished, and I'm ready to do the pulling part of it. So I'm going to use my corner rib just to kind of compress this right in the middle. And you can take it right into the center with this rib, all the way out to the outside edge, and then back into the middle. And you can even cross over that center point without digging in. All you have to do is kind of release the pressure on this corner, and you'll be just fine. So I've compressed that a little bit, and the bulk of the compression comes from just pushing it down. This is just kind of a extra added safety to kind of compress this and flatten it and smooth it all the way across. And if I'm doing something bigger, then of course I'll use a bigger rib that's got a bigger surface for compressing. But really, the main focus on that you need to do. So it's that pressure down, compressing the clay, smashing it as it comes out. Some clays are more apt to crack and some are not. I think most clays are apt to crack, especially if you're putting a lot of stress on them. Sometimes that stress comes during the drying process, especially if you've got thick and thin, so you have to be real careful on keeping the thickness pretty even throughout the pot and letting it dry very slowly. But I think once you get this compressed, you'll hardly ever have any cracks anymore. I don't have any of my plates or platters crack ever if I use this technique. And so hope that really helps. Thanks. Okay, so you saw how I used that in the studio, and it works almost every time. I hardly ever have cracks in my plates or platters anymore. I did one platter that I was also very excited about. Another great big platter. I had compressed, I had used this technique on it. I still ended up with a crack, and let me tell you what happened. What happened was, as I was trimming it, I was trying to take more off and make it even thinner because it's a big platter, so it's going to be heavy. I kept trimming and trimming and trimming, and it was great. And then when I let it dry, I let it dry really slowly so that it dried evenly. And then when I went out the next day, I thought, okay, I'm ready to take a look at this, and I lifted it up. The entire rim came off, and the base was cracked all around the outside edge. So frustrating after all that work. But what happened was I had trimmed it too thin on the bottom, and the sides were a little too thick. So what happens is, as the clay dries, it shrinks. You know what I mean? So the clay will shrink. Not only during the firing process does it shrink, but it shrinks from the time that it's wet to dry. It shrinks a little bit. And so that shrinkage puts stress on the clay. And especially if they're different thicknesses, they'll dry at different rates and they'll shrink at different rates. And that's what creates stress and unevenness, and it pulls and splits the clay, and that's where the cracks come from. So it's really important to have walls and bases that are even. You can see on this first pot that the first one has the base that's way too thick, and the bottom one is paper thin, and you don't want that either. So make the walls and the base the same thickness when trimming, and let's watch a video where I explain more in the studio. As we've talked about avoiding cracks, we've talked about the importance of the way that it gets centered for a platter and using compression, using a rib. And the other aspect is making sure that you don't have something that's too thin or too thick. So I intentionally trimmed this bowl too thin. Let me give you an example of what that looks like. So normally you don't want to have something that's too thin surrounded by something that's too thick. It's great to have pots that are nice and thin, but it can be too thin. So there comes a point where this is actually not too bad, but it was getting really thin. And so you can make this so that if this is too thin and the rest of your pot's about like that, it creates uneven stress as this dries, and a lot of times it'll cause that to crack if it's too thin. So if it's thin, it's not necessarily going to be a problem as long as the rest of it's nice and thin too. But when you have a thin part and a thick part, that's when it can create problems, right? So here's a bowl that I intentionally left extra thick. And to kind of show you an example, and this kind of happens when you're a new potter. Oftentimes you will throw it and you'll think it's fine, but it'll be just a little bit too thick. So as you can see, that was way too thick, right? So it was trimmed. The rest of the bowl was going to be okay, but this bottom part was way too thick and needs to be trimmed off. Now, normally it isn't necessarily a problem if it's too thick, but it can cause cracking, right? And it certainly makes it really a heavy bowl. So you really don't ever want to leave it quite this thick. But being thick isn't necessarily a problem except for the cracking and the weight. So easy way to avoid this is to trim it a little bit more, throw it a little more thin, so you get somewhere right in between these two. See, this was a little too thin, this is way too thick, and if you made this so that it was just about maybe a quarter of an inch or so, that would be just the right thickness. About the thickness of the wall of this is about right for the base. Basically, you want it to be fairly consistent all the way through. And you can feel that as you're holding the pot and getting ready to trim. You can see how thick it is and how thin it is up here, and you can make adjustments. And it's really, once you get the hang of it, it's really pretty easy, but it's important to make not too thin and not too thick. I hope these tips and tricks have been helpful for you today. My goal for you is that you'll be able to take the things that you've learned and implement them in your work immediately and see some great results. Now I have some exciting news that I want to share with you. I'm happy to introduce my full-length course, the pottery throwing course. It's the only full-length pottery throwing course on the market that's designed to give a step-by-step process to help you throw pottery that's good enough to sell. You're probably wondering what's included in this course. Well, let me get into that right now. This course includes 77 video lessons and over 12 and a half hours worth of content, 36 demonstration videos where you join me in the studio and I'll show you my process up close from beginning to end. I'm also throwing in 2 bonus videos where I'll show you how to throw more advanced pieces. And finally, you'll have immediate access to the downloadable 190-page PDF with all the photos and notes from our class instruction. So Module 1 is all about the tools, some of my very favorite tools and all the different ones that I have in the studio. And I go into clay and a lot of other things, the equipment that I use and all the beginning stuff. Module 2 is all about throwing. This module is worth the price of the whole course by itself because I go through the step-by-step process for mastering pottery throwing. I go through all my tips and tricks and give you everything that you'll need. Module 3 is all about trimming. I'm going to go through all the tools and techniques. I'm going to show you some of the practical uses for trimming, some of the different tools, and really go through how to shape the perfect pot, how to finish the base just right. Module 4 is all about decorating, glazing, and firing. This module we talk about a lot of ideas. I show you some of my favorite examples from other great potters for design to allow you to kind of create your own brand. But I go through the decorating, the glazing, the firing process, and I show you exactly which glazes I use and how I use them. Plus, I've added 3 more mini courses that go over some basic fundamental forms that are really key. How to throw a mug, how to throw a bowl, and how to throw a plate. I've done these in a lot of detail, and they're kind of fundamental things that'll really help. By now you're probably wondering how much this course is going to cost. You could spend hundreds and thousands on classes or private lessons. Normally the cost for this course is $297, but I'm going to give you a special introductory offer. The whole course, including all the extras, for only $97. This offer will only be good for the next few days, so I hope you'll take advantage of it. Also in the training, I've included a tool called Video Ask. It's kind of a cool tool that will allow you to ask questions from me. Whether it's a video, you want to send a video, or a text, or an email, this is the tool that will allow you to have access to me, and I promise that I'll respond as soon as I can. I really want to help, and this is a great tool to do that. I've included a 30-day money-back guarantee. Let me tell you how that works. So if for any reason you don't like the course or feel it wasn't of value to you, just let me know within 30 days and I'll refund your entire purchase price. So there is 0 risk.